what I'm seeing is three distinct buckets of technology that are starting to form. The first one is capture. So these are the companies that are scanning your sites, they're comparing them to the models, and they're comparing them to the previous progress, and they're giving you a detailed view of construction planning and scheduling. The next one that I'm seeing is computation and different calculations that you'd never ever be able to do to improve your forecasting, your risk, and other things like that. And then the last one is conversation. These are the rise of the chats. And the reason why I added this as a whole different bucket is because to me, this drops the barrier of entry down into using some augmented intelligence and some AI in a way that people have just never been able to do it before. And you may be wondering to yourself, wow, that's interesting, Micah. Why do you care about it? And the reason why is these nuclear power plants are going to bring a ton of energy to, most specifically, the data center market. Microsoft is actually trying to restart 3 Mile Island. Also seen in the news was Google, in a very similar move, but slightly different, is signed a deal to do small modular reactors.
There's a spectrum. I did my MBA on the first day. The accounting professor went, I am never going to be able to teach you accounting in the semester we have, but I'm going to teach you enough accounting where you'll be able to talk to accountants and understand what they're saying and understand what's important. And this is what I'd say with curves and projects. Understand curves and understand where you expect to see them and understand what they mean.
Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Piippo. I'm a planning and scheduling manager.
And my name's Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Each episode is designed to give you tactics and strategies that you can implement right away. Today, we're going to go on a random adventure. We're going to cover nuclear power plants, curves, recruiting, and the future of construction, planning, and scheduling technology. Greg, you ready to dive in?
Let's go.
All right, let's go. So, folks, I've seen several articles this week pop up about nuclear power plants. And you may be wondering to yourself, wow, that's interesting, Micah. Why do you care about it? And the reason why is that these nuclear power plants are going to bring a ton of energy to, most specifically, the data center market. So let me throw up on the screen real quick an article, if I can manage it, that Microsoft is actually trying to restart 3 Mile Island. Now, for everyone else in the world, 3 Mile Island was a nuclear facility that actually almost melted down like Chernobyl. I think it was back in the 80s or 90s. And they're starting a deal to relaunch it. Also seen in the news was Google, in a very similar move, but slightly different, is signed a deal to do small modular reactors. Now, this to me points to only one direction, is that our grid is constrained. What I mean by that is we don't have enough power for the amount of data centers we want to build. And now companies are desperately reaching out, trying to find solutions to bring more power to the grid. Greg, your thoughts?
I think this is really exciting. Obviously, I look at this a bit of a physicist, and I'm like, I studied a little bit of nuclear physics. So I look at this and I'm like, it's super interesting. So two things. Number one, why a nuclear reactor? Why not a solar farm or a wind farm or a coal or gas, and I would assume that the locations of these data centers aren't don't have very accessible fuel sources, and or they don't have the room or the sunlight for or wind for renewables. What I mean by that is you can ship in nuclear fuel on a single train and burn that, but obviously you can do it on coal, but you'd have to have coal trains coming in every single day because of the amount you burn. So that's number one, which it tells me they're building it in quite interesting locations. Number two, that the small modular reactors are cool because theoretically, a small modular reactor is more expensive per kilowatt hour than a large one, but the difference is a small one you can build faster. You don't have to drop 20 billion before they're up and running in 10 years' time. So you can actually just pump them off the line. And theoretically, they're a lot safer because you don't have this entire house-size compartment that can melt down and blow up. You have a much smaller compartment that can melt down and blow up.
Yeah. So one of the things I found, so safety aside, one of the things I found most interesting was the power for the Google deal was available in 2030. So
that's actually really quick in nuclear, really
quick in nuclear reactor terms. But for me, I'm just saying, 2030 is where they want this power to increase by. And I'm sure the 3 Mile Island deal is probably somewhere around there as well, too. But to me, that just shows you that the demand for data centers is going to continue to grow through. They're looking through that time period. I mean, all the big tech companies have 10 plus year demand plans that they're looking at, and so they're so confident they're investing billions of dollars to try and reach those curves, which is again to me just a sign that data centers shall continue to grow.
That's crazy. I've just had a look at the dates. So in the UK, there's a nuclear reactor being built called Sizewell C.
Yeah.
And just to kind of put that in perspective, here you go. I'm just Wikipediaing this, so I don't know how accurate it is. But 2010, the government said this is kind of the location. Proposal in 2012. Right, they got a heads of term in 2015. And in 2020, it submitted development consent. So let's say about 2020 they broke ground. This is going to cost between 20 and 35 billion, and this is not going to get up and running by 2030. Oh, here we go. There's the timeline. So construction has started, by the way. I can tell you construction has started.
Woo! Woo! Hey, if you're on that project, celebrate that milestone. You put a shovel in the ground.
I'm just having a look. Like I think this is due to be finished like mid 2030s. So look, this is a very large reactor, by the way. It's a full. So Sizewell C, there's Sizewell A, Sizewell B, and this is Sizewell C. So it's building a full reactor building next to an existing infrastructure on the east coast of the UK. Like that's nuts. So to say 2030, which is only call it 5 years away, that's real fast. That does show how much demand there is. Wow.
Yeah, we're going to go on a little bit of a tangent and jump back into potentially how you could land jobs at some of these projects. But we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about curves. Greg, do you want to start us on this adventure?
I love me some curves. But this is a random thing. I was having some dinners this week with a bunch of people, and what was lovely is that loads of people listened to the podcast and came up and were like, "Thanks, keep going," etc. And we were talking about some of the math, and basically it was this. I realised there's very, very little education in project management about curves. Now, if you do physics and engineering, I still shake at the year where I had to learn all of this because, there would be a professor at the front of the class who'd be like, so 1 + 1 = 2. You'd kind of turn away, look back, and he's like, and if we integral this second order, and you're like, whoa, I completely lost that train. But basically I found these, and it's just literally types of curves, and I actually think that a little bit of education in these would really help people think about the physics and the maths of how projects work. So the ones that we're very, very used to is a normal distribution, which, by the way, if you add up cumulatively, this is actually the S-curve. So if you add like this chunk to that chunk, blah, blah, blah.
The you think your project's going to be on time, we just baselined S curve, not the
Yeah.
3 months later where your project really is. I feel like we're going to get into that curve next.
Exactly. And by the way, this just says types of probability distribution in machine learning. It's not. I actually, just before this, I got my old physics textbook out, modern physics.
Going analog, love it.
There's the wave function of a quantum mechanical function. They look the same. Curves are everywhere. It's the same curves. It's not just machine learning. It's actually not just physics. It's just maths. It's curves. So the big one for me is actually when you mix. And actually, I like log normal here. So it's not one here. It's this, a skewed distribution. This is how, when I look at project activities, projects, resources, this is actually how I see them behave. It's more late than it is early. So if we said this middle is like on time, you'll have a couple of things that are early, but a lot more things that are late. And like you can merge these together.
Yeah.
But like this is when it calls the triangular distribution here. This is what people try and use when they do a Monte Carlo, but they summarize this nice curve here with this triangle. And you can see how that triangle isn't quite that curve. So when people do Monte Carlo, you're already doing it with problems because you've summarized those.
Could you go back up to those two other curves? Because I think that my brain is getting a little fired up. They're right there, the skew distribution. So to me, what I typically see is that top graph, which would be like a left-leaning skew. That typically ends, people don't draw the tail out for it. You know what I mean? It kind of like they just bring it down into a stop. And then
like that.
Yeah, but it'll have that skew. It'll have the like, we're gonna climb Everest and deliver this project. The bottom curve is then what typically happens, but then it doesn't drop like that as well. It sometimes even just tails out as well too. And
it is actually. Do you know what's interesting? This top one is kind of like how activities behave, but because we make projects interconnected with all the relationships in scheduling, the bottom one is actually how delays turn out. So like this mean would be like when they're planned to do, but most projects are like this much later, but a bunch go longer.
It just has so many eerie, bringing back memories of other projects where I think as people start to make curves out of anything, and you should always visualize your data in some sort of simplistic manner. You don't need to create super fancy chart or graph, but as you start to look at how things are moving and changing on your project, if we rewind back a little bit, step one is to look at how things are moving on your project. Take a couple weeks of project files, couple months of project files, start building those trends and analysis out. Step two is to start looking at that trend of what it's going to be. If you end up with a normal distribution, good for you. However, it's probably not going to last, and you'll probably start seeing some of these skews come into effect. So stuff that'll push your project left and push your project right. And being able to realize these, super helpful, because then you can start looking at that trend going forward in the future. I mean, that's just like excellent planning and scheduling to be able to bring that to the table and say, listen, we got an issue.
100%. And as you're talking, I'm thinking here that, understanding curves does not mean understanding differential mathematics. Like there's a spectrum. It's like when I did my MBA on the first day, the accounting professor went, I am never going to be able to teach you accounting in the semester we have, but I'm going to teach you enough accounting where you'll be able to talk to accountants and understand what they're saying and understand what's important. So, I can put together a balance sheet and a cash flow and a P&L to a kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. I can't do the advanced stuff, but I can understand when the advanced stuff. And this is what I'd say with curves and projects. I'd be like, just understand curves and understand where you expect to see them and understand what they mean. And then, to be honest, get one of the engineers to come in, because the engineers should really understand the maths behind it. These curves, by the way, are the same kind of curves they apply to structural integrity. So, like, when will iron snap? It's a curve like this. So engineers should really understand this stuff. If obviously you don't have anyone that's got a physics or engineering or maths background in the project controls department.
You can always ask ChatGPT.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Sure, you'll get a square answer. Assume the role of a project engineer who knows skewed distribution.
To be honest, I'd just say,
Greg.
know the names. Know the names, because that's the big first thing. Know a couple of examples, and then know when which curves you should expect to see. So if someone comes to me with a normal distribution and goes, "This is how all of our activities are going to behave," I'm going to go, bullshit. Unless this is the most unique project I've ever seen.
You can do this on activities. You can do this on activity starts, activity finishes. You can do this on resources. You can do this on durations. Pretty much anything in your project file, folks, as we're talking about, is like you can do this distribution on. So that's like, pick whatever you want and then start looking for some of these trends and examples. All right, rolling on past the curves, we're skewing right to our next topic. I gotta work on these puns. That's a bad
terrible.
one.
So bad. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, there's no shame left in this game. Folks, we've had a ton of people reach out to us looking for careers, looking for jobs. Greg and I have a pretty big network, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to work with recruiters and how recruiters can help your career. But before we get into that, if you are a company looking to hire high professional, high quality schedulers, please reach out to me and Greg. We've had so many planners and schedulers reach out to us. We have a surplus of talented people. So if you need somebody on your job to help plan and schedule, feel free to reach out to us. Now, Greg, I know Nodes and Links uses recruiters a bunch. I've had a ton of experience with recruiters. For me, when I'm out there looking for jobs, looking for new roles, recruiters are a great way to efficiently expand your network if you are on the want to go get a job side. And if you're a company, it is tremendously hard to hire qualified planners and schedulers. There's no degree for it. And you never quite know whether someone who is just can talk the game or actually do the game. And it's so hard to tease it out unless you have a strong SME who can interview those candidates and make sure you get the right person. So which coin do you want to tackle first? The company side or like the personal side?
I'll tackle the company side because I think it explains the personal side in terms of why I use these. So on the company side, it all comes down to opportunity cost. So what is it worth to me to get a really good person in month 1 rather than month 4? Well, I've got 3 months of ramp and etc. there. That will actually carry with it a monetary value. Now, there's two. I'm gonna oversimplify here, but there's two big kinds of recruiting. There's mass recruiting, which is I've got a whole host of jobs that are generally the same, normally more junior, and I just need to fill them and with the right people, but I just need to fill them. With that kind of scale operation, you get economies of scale. So a lot of companies bring that kind of recruiting in-house and don't use recruiters. When you're going for the more singular jobs, so if you're trying to get a senior planner or a senior scheduler or a head of planning or a VP of project, like more senior positions where, to your point, actually finding the really, really good people is much, much harder. Well, that's when it can make sense to go to a recruiter because of two things. One, the recruiter already has the network because they know that people will come to them asking for that job. So they already have a book of people that they already know could be interesting for that buyer. And then the second is they can just move much faster. It's again the economies of scale. So what I'd say on a company side, there's nothing. So nodes and links anyway. We actually use both approaches. We'll go out to find people, but we'll also engage recruiters, and it's kind of first past the post, because it's once we find the right person is so valuable to the organization that the kind of cost of the recruiter is nothing in the grand scheme of things. So I just like people to have that in mind, which is there's the kind of the vast hiring. And by the way, that's when you can go to company websites and they list jobs and this kind of thing. And it's more like say graduate schemes. And then there's a second, which is the specific jobs. Yes, companies will advertise that, but they will absolutely be going to recruiters at the same time to get good candidates.
Wondering for me, I've been mostly on the dealing with recruiter side, and it is always such a boost to have basically someone out there hunting for jobs for you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a ton of different recruiters. We should bring in a recruiter and shoot a whole show on recruiting. But from a high level, do your research, do your homework, who the person who you're working out with, because there can be actual company recruiters. So the person works for the company that you're recruiting for, and they're part of the HR department. And that's one level of recruiter. There's independent recruiters like, Chirag, we've had on a show before.
Yep.
You can go back and watch that episode. He's a very, very talented, awesome recruiter. We should have him back on again to do an episode. And so there's independent recruiters like that. And so you want to do your homework on them, make sure, because there's all sorts of little things that I found over the years about, if you sign a contract, how long you have to stay on for, or you have to give back your signing bonus and all these little things. But definitely do your research. But it's a great way to expand your network and get more jobs, more inbound faster. And then recruiters are thinking of you. Oh, hey, Micah, was looking for this type of role on the East Coast with these sorts of companies. Weird. I just talked to a company, it popped up. Let me plug them in. I mean, it can really boost your career, move you along much faster than just by traditional means.
I completely agree, and actually, you just kind of gave me an idea there. Like, if I was in the scheduling game in the UK, I'd be calling Chirag up and being like, "This is where I am now. This is where I want to get to." And Chirag's an amazing guy. He sees hundreds of roles every couple of months. So I'd be saying, what are people paying in the market? What are the kind of profiles that you're placing into these roles? What do I have to develop for myself? Because one is, they can very quickly tell you what you're lacking on a CV or something like this. But number two, to your point, is there's nothing quite like when I'm sitting down with the recruiter and I'm like, oh, this is the job, this is exactly what we want, like these, and they go, I've got exactly the person for you. If you're front of mind, your CV will go in first, and this isn't a game of submit 50 CVs and see what happens.
Yeah,
It genuinely is first past the post. If they go, I've got the CV, hits the desk, the interview, that person's amazing, you won't look for anyone else. You'll just hire that person.
that's how it works. That's the game. All right, switching gears a little bit. I have no terrible pun for this transition since the last one fell so flat. I will say though, I think it's November. I should know, but November 14th, I'll be presenting at the Advancing Planning and Scheduling 2024. If you're watching this years later, I hope it went well, but unfortunately, you missed the boat on coming, which is kind of funny with how we shoot these and how they go. It's like years later. So this is the conference I'll be speaking at, Advancing Planning and Scheduling 2024, Dallas. If you're there, come say hi. I will be mixing around and about, and I'll probably be shooting some impromptu podcast episodes like we did at the Project Controls Expo, which we haven't dropped yet, but we'll drop that episode here soon. Greg and I shot a episode live at that conference. So we're not going to talk all the way about this. I just want to shout it out because I wanted to give a little flair about what I'll be presenting there at the conference. I'm going to be talking about planning and scheduling and the future of planning and scheduling. And so this is a graphic I've been working on. Posted it about a year ago, and I've kind of modified it a little bit, but just to walk people along on the journey where my brain is at is, I see us kind of in just thinking about construction planning and scheduling, three distinct phases. Okay. Phase one, just think about all the stuff from like the 50s and backwards that are basically like the algorithms that most software is using today. This is your critical path and your Gantt chart. If you go back to the history of time, this stuff was created quite some time ago. And then to transition out of phase one, you have the entrance of computers. What happens is you get into the 80s, you get computers, and they take these algorithms and they put them in the software that we use today. So this is Primavera P6, this is your lean and your pole planning. And then as you end that era, those pieces of software go from on your computer to the cloud. There isn't, I mean, that's to me, that kind of development that happened over that time period. And the biggest change that I saw is you got prettier UIs at the end of this session and things were on the cloud. So you could access from the cloud, but they were still leveraging the basic concepts in 1.0. Primavera P6 didn't radically change anything over that time period. They were still using a critical path methodology calculation. And that's very much so for most of the products out there on the market. Now, I think what we've had is the big change in the 2020s is, I'm just going to use the big fancy word, augmented intelligent AI that you've probably seen everywhere. But what I'm seeing from, I've interviewed and seen hundreds of company pitches over the last, 4 to 5 years. I've read hundreds and hundreds of white papers on construction planning and scheduling. What I'm seeing is three distinct buckets of technology that are starting to form. The first one is capture. So these are the companies that are scanning your sites, they're comparing them to the models, and they're comparing them to the previous progress, and they're giving you a detailed view of construction planning and scheduling. The next one that I'm seeing is computation. These are the companies that are using they're using some of the older models, but they're also bringing in new age computing. They're bringing in machine learning. They're bringing in AI, and they're being able to do calculations faster and different calculations that you'd never ever be able to do to improve your forecasting, your risk, and other things like that. And then the last one, which I could lump into computation, but I think it's a little bit different for me, is conversation. Mm-hmm. And these are the rise of the chats. And I think this is the reason why I added this as a whole different bucket, is because to me, this bucket really drops the barrier of entry down into using some augmented intelligence and some AI in a way that people have just never been able to do it before. We've highlighted the Primavera P6 help guide. I mean, that's the GPT where you type in a problem you have in Primavera P6 and it spits out an answer. That technology is super cheap and easy to access, but it is also gives you just a wealth of knowledge, and you just don't see that. So that's to me where I'm seeing the trends in future shape. Greg, am I close? Did I miss the mark? What are you thinking?
It's pretty spot on to what I'm seeing as well. What I'd say is the four lumps. I'd stick cloud in kind of where we are now as well, purely because the industry's been dominated by so many large monopoly providers that it was kind of the Kodak moment. There was zero incentive to change business models and invest. So the project controls space is really far behind on cloud. P6 is just coming to the cloud kind of thing, and they're still working out the kinks. It's like, really?
I got that in the 2010s.
Yeah, you got it in the 2010s, and it's like 2024, and it's like, is it okay?
Yeah, I like to live with my toe in the future, I would say. But no, that could be a little adjustment, a little line drawn into saying it's still coming.
But it would. But what I'd probably just putting what these things are there to do. You've seen my presentation. I just say AI is really just about its automation. Capture is real world automation. What I'd say computation is it's automation of having a really advanced data science team that you couldn't afford, basically.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, if you're on even $1 billion project, quite honestly, you wouldn't be able to afford the data science teams that some of these companies have.
And even if you could afford it, to me, it's the computation bucket. The companies have already solved the problem. They've given you the answer. and you have to hire a load of data scientists, figure out what the actual problem is with your data, plus how you're going to solve the answer for the data, and then get to that level where it pumps it out. I don't know. To me, it seems like even if you had that sort of money, you'd waste too much time getting to those answers.
But I do, in all fairness, I do actually see some companies doing that. There's the occasional senior manager or SVP that seems to think that their company's deep experience in construction and contract management allows them to very easily transition to agile software and AI development for a scale of just their organization as opposed to 20,000 organizations around the world. Like, some of them it'll work out, but some of them, you look and just go, that is a middle manager who's spending money that's not their own
Yeah.
to try and get a profile internally to move on before people realize that it was a folly's errand, delete the project and buy off the shelf anyway.
Every once in a while, you buy a donkey and it becomes a unicorn. I've seen it maybe one time.
Yeah, so there's that. And
But
then
I don't, but I guess my other point to this, I'm not saying don't have a data science team and don't use data. But I think what I would argue is understand what's available on the market and don't attack the problems that have already been solved. Now, if you want to hire a data science team that's going to merge your capture and computation and then integrate it with conversation and use some off the shelf products to kind of get to a place that they're not going to be able to get to quicker, brilliant. Go for that. Like, go for another step jump. But don't go try and recreate Alice or something like that. Or don't,
yeah,
think that because you can do a couple little whiz bang things with photos on ML that you're going to go replace like a Doxel. It's just, to me, that just seems the definition of recreating a wheel.
yeah, I would agree with that. And actually, that comes to something we were discussing before this, where a couple of companies have actually approached me and um, asked us to form a data science team that they can hire. I haven't thought about it really in any detail before, but there are companies who are thinking about it the right way, which is there's a lot of things that can get 80% towards exactly what they want, and then there will be some polishing at the other end. Just like, I'm pretty sure you can hire a consultant to come in and give you a general schedule for building a data center, but then you're going to have to sit down and go, what are we really doing here? And what is our contract saying? And, you make it specific. It's that kind of thing. The final thing I'd just say on this, so, I was talking about capture. The computation it's the economies of scale on data science. The conversation, actually, the thing that I'm very excited about is exactly what you said, which is ease of access. What conversation is graduating to is AI agency, which essentially are bots that you interact with in a human way, which is conversational, but have computation and capture backbones on them
Yeah.
so they can actually
Bingo.
do work. And a number of the venture capitalists have actually talked now about we're going through the age of the death of software, and we're entering the age of the purchase of work. So rather than me buying a piece of software for me to go and figure something out, I can actually just buy the end result in itself, and a whole bunch of AI makes it for me.
Conversation is, no offense to nodes and links here. Conversation to me is the easiest one that if I was a senior manager, I would be turning on right away. I would figure out how can I get this in my company, on my teams, getting people to use it and understand what it can do in a safe, secure, manner, because you have to sign a contract with all of the companies in capture and computation to go out there and use their products. And with conversation, you could just jump right in and start using it. And a lot of these companies are also, like Greg Implant has conversation built into them now. So
Yep.
if you're already an implant, like, go for it. But as people start to kind of tease out how they want to play out this technology game, it's such a powerful tool. Give a shout out to the Beyond Deadlines newsletter. I post a prompt every single week that you can use out there in the workforce, and I go all over the place with it. I've done an activity, a Primavera P6 activity checker, where it goes through and checks the names of different activities to see if it aligns to your what your spec is. I've done career conversations. I've done going through and making sure your WBS is correct. I mean, we've shown the Primavera P6 helper countless times. It's a super powerful tool. And when its back end knowledge is improved, like you're saying, Greg, I mean, the game just changes because now it has access to all sorts of information of whether the project's on time, what's the risk analysis, what's the top 5 activities. And the more you can push your teams in that direction to leverage these tools, it's just going to improve their productivity and you're going to get better answers. And that's to me where that's the big improvement that we're going to see.
I was having a conversation this week over dinner with a listener actually of Beyond Deadlines, and it was an awesome conversation. He was being very candid with me, and one of the things that we talked about was using these new technologies is actually not a logical choice for people, including myself. By the way, I reflected on this and I was like, oh yeah, it's an emotional one because fear of the unknown, and lots of people, including you and I, fall into the trap sometime of just saying it's going to be the future and explaining the logic of it, but not really thinking about the fact that we were lucky enough to just have exposure therapy. It wasn't that we were any different than anyone else and had resilience to the fear of change. It was literally just that we had to play with this kind of stuff. And then once you play with it, you start to understand it. And once you start to understand it, you don't fear it. So I actually think that one of the big things going forward is going to be how managers and teams make it a non-scary thing to start playing with that level of AI.
Yeah, part of that to me is you're going to roll the tools out first. The second one, what got me thinking in my brain is this is going to be similar to probably the transition you and I saw, Greg, when we were first coming up, where it's like, oh, you can use a spreadsheet. I need you.
Yep.
In a very similar manner, I think there's going to be a lot of early entry people into construction who have just grown up using ChatGPT, using Copilot, using Gemini, and they're going to know how to prompt and they're going to be good at it. And you'll see this really cool wave of younger people come in. But to me, a chat, like you being able to be effectively use chat blows like a VLOOKUP out of the water,
Yeah.
I mean, so that's what I'm excited to see. All right, folks, we have crushed this random episode and definitely gone past probably your bedtime if you're listening to this and you're hoping for a 20-minute episode. So we're going to wrap this one up. Greg, any final thoughts before we take off out of here?
I'd just like to thank a bunch of people who came up to me this week at random events and actually thanked us for spending our Sundays recording these episodes. Like, when you and I set out, we kind of put it as we need a reason to meet up every Sunday that is not susceptible to saying no. So it's not like, oh, I'm tired or I got drunk. It's no, we have to do it because we've committed to it. So that's actually why we started it.
That's a great pitch. Beyond Deadlines, because I needed a way to force myself to talk to Greg.
But you know the point. And we were saying that if people listen, that's an added bonus because it means that, we've entertained someone or it's been helpful or whatever. But, I had people coming up saying they've listened to all the episodes and they were listing the best ones and they were asking about certain subjects, and it's wonderful. So I'd like to give a shout out to the Scottish and the Irish people who came up to me and say, thank you very much for listening. It makes it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for everyone for listening. For us at Beyond Deadlines, go buy our book, The Critical Path Career, on Amazon. I'll put a link into it. But then if you don't buy it, have a great week. And we're going to see you on the next one.